Good evening. As you listen to the sound of my voice, you might begin to notice your breath deepening, slowing. Allow me to be your gentle guide tonight, effortlessly leading you through the peaceful landscapes of history, to a time and place that feels very far away. Tonight, there are no complexities to solve, only the soft and simple threads of a story for you to follow. If you wish, a story that begins in a world lit only by fire and faith. As you begin to settle, just one gentle thought. If this space feels like a comfort to you, you might consider a soft tap on the like or subscribe button. It's a quiet way to ensure you can always find your way back to this calm harbor, but only if that thought feels as effortless as a quiet breath. Your rest is what truly matters. And if you feel moved to, you can leave a comment with your city and the time on your clock. It's a nice way for us to know we are all listening to this quiet story together, in our own corners of the world. And now, with the lights turned down low, and your body feeling heavy and warm, let's simply close our eyes and arrive at the beginning of our journey. The air in the room is thick. It smells of damp wool, with smoke from the central hearth, and a faint, earthy scent of the rushes strewn across the floor. You are sitting on a low wooden stool, your hands folded in your lap, your posture impossibly straight. It's the year 1250, give or take a decade, and the world, for a woman like you, is a very simple room with only two doors. Your father has been talking for what feels like hours. His voice is a low drone, punctuated by the occasional throat clearing of the man sitting opposite him. This other man is your future, or at least, ATS one of the two available models of your future. His name is Gerard, a merchant whose success is new enough that he still feels the need to wear a fur-lined cloak indoors. You haven't dared to look at his face directly, but you've seen his hands. They are sick, capable, and currently wrapped around a cup of watered wine. They are the hands that will own you, your dowry, and the children you will be expected to produce. This is the first door. Marriage. It is not a story of romance. It is a contract, a merger of properties. Earlier, Gerard's father had a brief, frank discussion with your own, and you overheard a rather detailed debate about the number and quality of your teeth. It's a detail that history books often gloss over, but the practicalities of a medieval marriage alliance often resembled the sale of prized livestock. You are healthy. Your childbearing hips are noted with a satisfied nod, and your dowry includes a not insignificant plot of land. You are a good bargain. Through this door lies the life of a wife, a mother, a manager of a household. It's a life of service to a husband and family, a path of honor and expectation. It is a life. You let your gaze drift past the men, towards the high, narrow window, through the wavy, imperfect glass. You can just make out the spire of the town church, a grey finger pointing towards the heavens. That is the second door, the convent, for a woman of your station. This is the only other respectable choice, to become a bride of Christ. It sounds poetic, but you know what it means. It means a life of prayer and silence, of bells and routine. You would trade the authority of a husband for the authority of an abbess, the demands of children for the demands of God. Your dowry would go to the church, buying your place within its hallowed and very permanent rules. You would be safe, you would be fed, you would surrender your name, your clothes, your will. You would be erased, piece by piece, until only a vessel for piety remained. Some women find true solace there, a genuine calling. For you, it feels less like a calling and more like a beautifully carved, but equally secure, cage. Historians, by the way, still argue about this. They debate how much quiet power a woman like you might have wielded in this situation. Perhaps a carefully chosen word, a subtle hesitation, or a well-timed so could steer the negotiations. Maybe you could have influenced which convent, or which man, became your destiny. But from where you're sitting now, on this hard wooden stool, any sense of agency feels like a distant fantasy. Your life is a story being written by the two men droning on beside the fire. You are merely the parchment. So use it. A silent observer at the auction of your own life. The first door leads to a small, familiar world you will run for someone else. The second door leads to a small, silent world run by an ancient, unchangeable rulebook. Both are locked. Both require you to hand over the key to your own existence. As the merchant Jared laughs at something your father says, a booming, possessive sound that seems to fill the entire room. You feel a profound sense of stillness, not of peace, but of resignation. 2 doors. And you must choose which one to be pushed through. You must pick your cage. There are no other options, or so you have always been told. The meeting ends. Gerard the merchant and his father leave with a series of satisfied grunts and firm handshakes with your own father. The deal is not yet sealed, but the foundations have been laid. You are to be the cornerstone of their new alliance. No one asks for your opinion. You are an asset, and assets do not have opinions. Later that evening, as you help your Aunt Elspeth clear the heavy wooden wrenches from the table, the silence in the room feels different. It's no longer just quiet. It's heavy with your unspoken future. Elspeth is your mother's older sister, a spinster who lives in the shadow of your family's household. She is all sharp angles and quiet movements. A woman who has navigated her entire life by making herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. She catches your eye, and for a moment, her gaze is not one of pity, but of understanding. She waits until your mother is out of earshot, busy with a retting pot by the hearth. Then she leans in close, her voice a dry whisper, like rustling leaves. "There is another way," she murmurs, so quietly you almost think you've imagined it. You stop what you're doing, a piece of leftover bread clutched in your hand. You look at her, truly look at her, and see a flicker of something you've never seen before in her tired eyes. A tiny spark of rebellion. "What way?" you whisper back. "The convent." It feels like the only other answer. She shakes her head. A quick, bird-like motion. "No, not the convent. Not exactly." She glances over her shoulder. A habit born of a lifetime of being unheard. "In the cities. In Ghent. In Bruges. Even here, if you know where to look. There are communities of women. They call themselves Beguines. The word is foreign to you. It sounds strange on her tongue. It sounds unsentient. What are they? You ask, your heart starting to beat a little faster. They are women who wish to live a pious life. She explains, her words careful and chosen, but they take no permanent vows. They do not lock themselves behind a convent wall for all eternity. They live together. They work. They pray. And if they ever wish to leave, to marry, or to return to their families, they simply leave. The idea is so radical it feels like a physical shock. To choose a religious life and then to be able to unchoose it. It defies everything you know about God and commitment. It sounds like a loophole in the divine contract. They can just walk away. They can, Elspeth confirms. They are bound only by their own will, for as long as their will holds. They build their own houses, run their own workshops. They are weavers, brewers, laundresses, scribes. They earn their own body. They answer to no husband, no father, no abbot. You try to picture it. A town, or a street, or even just a house, where the rhythm of life isn't dictated by a man's needs or a church bell. A place where a woman's time is her own. It's a concept so alien you can't quite form the image in your mind. But who protects them? Who guides them? They guide themselves, she says, a note of awe in her voice, and they pray, not just in the Latin of priests, but in our own tongue. They write and read holy words in the language of the street, so that any woman might understand them directly. This, you know, is a dangerous idea. To claim to understand God's word without the filter of a priest was to stand on the very edge of heresy. Theologians and historians, to this day, can't quite agree on how this whole movement even began. Some argue it was a spontaneous explosion of female piety, a grassroots spiritual revival. Others point to more practical reasons. The Crusades and other wars had left a surplus of unmarried women with no clear place in society, and this was an ingenious social and economic solution. Was it a feminist impulse born centuries before its time, or a simple necessity? The truth is likely a tangled mix of all these things. As Elspeth speaks, she echoes this very debate. Some say it was born from a holy vision to a pious widow in Flanders. She whispers. Others say it was just a few clever women who refused to starve after their husbands died. No one truly knows. What you do know is that the two solid doors that defined your world are starting to seem less solid. Elspeth's words have revealed a third possibility. Not a grand, ornate door, but a hidden one, almost invisible. A path that is not about being owned by a man or by the church, but about belonging to yourself. What is it? The loud, you ask, the final, crucial question. Elspeth's face clouds over. It is tolerated, she says, choosing her word carefully. So now, the women are pious, they are charitable, they heal the sick, the town finds them useful. But there are whispers. Priests who say a woman cannot be trusted to guide her own soul. Men who say it is unnatural for women to live without a man's rule. They call them proud, obstinate. Some even use a darker word. She doesn't have to say it. Heresy. The word hangs in the air between you, cold and heavy. This third path is not a safe one. It is an experiment, an improvisation, a defiance of the natural order of things. She straightens up then, her moment of boldness passing. She takes the wooden plate from your hand and turns back to her work, becoming small and unobtrusive once more. But it's too late. The whisper has been spoken, the idea has been planted. For the rest of the night, as you lie on your straw mattress, you don't see two doors anymore. You see a tiny crack of light shining from under a third, unseen door, and you wonder, for the very first time, if you might have the courage to reach for its handle. The whispers of your Aunt Elspeth do not fade with the morning light. They take root. Over the next few days, you move through your life like a ghost, performing your duties with a new, strange detachment. When you mend your father's tunic, you see the thick hands of Gerard the merchant wearing it. When you knead dough, you imagine doing it in his kitchen, your belly swelling with his child. Year after year, the two doors are no longer just choices. They feel like the walls of a tomb, slowly closing in. The world you have always known, the only world you were ever meant to know, has become a foreign country. The decision is not made in a flash of lightning or a moment of grand defiance. It crystallizes one afternoon in the market square. You see Gerard from a distance, haggling loudly over a cask of wine. He throws his head back and laughs, clapping the vendor on the back with a force that makes the smaller man stumble. In that moment, he is not just a man, he is a force of nature, an odor, a certainty, and you realize, with a clarity that feels like ice water in your veins, that you would rather face any uncertainty in the world than be owned by that certainty. You would rather risk damnation than endure that kind of salvation. That night, you begin to plan your escape. It's a pathetic little plan, really. It involves saving a heel of bread from dinner and acquiring a water skin that doesn't leak too badly. Your great escape is less of a daring adventure and more of a quiet theft from your own future. One of the stranger facts of your time is the Church's attempt to impose something called the peace and truce of God. It's a set of rules meant to limit the rampant violence of the nobility, forbidding fighting on certain holy days. Academics still debate how effective these divine restraining orders actually were. But you've heard that travel is marginally safer on a Friday, so you will leave on a Friday. It feels like the only protection you can hope for. The night before you leave, Elspeth finds you in the small alcove where you sleep. She doesn't say a word. She simply presses a small, heavy cloth pouch into your hand. You can feel the clink of a few coins inside. It's not a fortune, but it's more money than you have ever held in your life. It is her life savings. You realize, the tiny hoard of a woman who has never had anything to call her own. She meets your eyes, and in her gaze is the lifetime of journeys she never took. She is giving you her own unlived escape. You leave before the first hint of dawn, when the air is cold and smells of wet stone and charcoal. You don't look back at the house. Looking back would be a mistake. You slip through the sleeping town, your soft leather shoes making almost no sound on the cobblestones. You are a shadow detaching itself from a tapestry. The journey is not what you imagine. There are no friendly pilgrims or traveling minstrels. The road is a ribbon of mud, rutted and treacherous, clinging to your hem and trying to pull you back. Every man you see on the road, a carter with an ox, a pair of soldiers, a lone farmer, watches you with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. A woman traveling alone is an anomaly. She is either a runaway, a prostitute, or a saint, and none of those are safe things to be. You learn quickly to make yourself small, just as Elspeth did. You pull your cloak tightly around you, keep your eyes on the ground, and walk with a purpose you do not feel. You eat your stale bread in hidden copses of trees, your back against a cold, mossy trunk, starting at every snap twig. At night, you don't dare seek shelter at an inn. Instead, you find a farmer's barn, burrowing deep into the hay. The scent of dried grass and animals is strange, primitive comfort. You lie there, listening to the sounds of the night, every fiber of your being screaming that you have made a terrible mistake. You have traded a warm bed and a predictable, if suffocating, future for this, for cold, and fear, and the constant, gnawing uncertainty of what lies ahead. Historians often discuss the limited agency of medieval women, but they rarely capture the sheer, gut-wrenching terror that came with trying to exercise it. After 2 days of walking, your feet are a mess of blisters and your body aches with a weariness you've never known. You are hungry, you are dirty, and you are utterly, completely alone. But as you crest a small hill, you see it in the distance, the city, the one Elspeth named. It's a smudge of grey walls and rooftops against the horizon. It looks enormous, intimidating, a fortress of unknown dangers. Somewhere inside those walls is the rumored sanctuary, the Beguines, the third door. You have no idea if they will take you in. You have no idea if you can even find them. You have burned the bridge to your old life, and now you stand at the edge of a new one, with no guarantee of safe passage. Taking a deep, ragged breath, you readjust the small bundle on your shoulder and begin the slow, painful descent towards the city gates. The city is a shock to the system. After the quiet emptiness of the road, the sheer noise and press of humanity is overwhelming. The air is thick with the smells of baking bread, raw sewage, tanning leather, and 100 other things you can't identify. People shout, carts rattle over the uneven stones, and a blacksmith's hammer rings a relentless rhythm that sets your teeth on edge. You, a small figure in a mud-stained cloak, are completely invisible here, a single drop of water in a churning river. And for the first time since you left home, that invisibility feels like a kind of safety. You ask for directions to the Beguines. The first person you ask, a stout woman selling onions, just gives you a suspicious look and turns away. The second, a young boy, points a grubby finger down a long, winding street before demanding one of your precious coins for the information. You give it to him. Your aunt's gift is already dwindling. You follow the boy's direction, navigating a labyrinth of narrow alley. The houses lean in so close overhead that they nearly touch, blocking out the sky. You feel a growing sense of dread. What if this was all a folk tale, a spinster's fantasy? What if you've run away from home only to find yourself destitute in a city that would swallow you whole? And then you see it. At the end of a cramped lane, the space opens up into a clean, quiet courtyard. It's surrounded by a high stone wall, but the gate stands open, an unassuming invitation. There is no grand archway, no intimidating guard. It simply marks a threshold. On one side is the chaotic, grimy city. On the other, is something else entirely. You hesitate at the entrance, peering inside. The first thing you notice is the quiet. It's not the dead silence of a convent, but a low hum of purposeful activity. Women are moving across the courtyard. Their steps quick and light. Some carry baskets of laundry, others bundles of dyed yarn. A woman sits on a bench, mending a fishing net, her fingers working with a practiced, hypnotic speed. Another is tending a neat, orderly garden of herbs. They are all dressed in simple, sober-colored robes of grey or dark blue, their hair covered by clean white windlass. But the most astonishing thing, the thing that makes you catch your breath, is that there are no men, not one. There are no soldiers swaggering through the square, no merchants shouting their wares, no priests observing from a shadowed doorway. You have stumbled into a world operating on a completely different axis. It's a city in miniature. Don't buy into the women you see before you. The buildings are small but well maintained, their stone walls whitewashed and clean. There's a central pump for water, a large building that looks like a communal hall, and even a small chapel, its steeple modest compared to the great cathedral that dominates the city's skyline. This place, the Beguine Age, is a historical anomaly. Many major cities in the Low Countries in Germany had one. Some, like the one in Ghent, were enormous, housing thousands of women and functioning as entirely self-contained walled towns with their own infirmaries, breweries, and farms. Scholars often refer to them as the first organized women's movements in European history, though it's a label the Beguines themselves would never have recognized. They were not revolutionaries in a political sense. Their revolution was a quiet, practical one. They simply built the world they needed, right in the shadow of the one that had no place for them. A woman with a kind, wrinkled face looks up from her gardening and sees you hovering at the gate. She doesn't look surprised or suspicious. She simply smiles, a gentle, welcoming expression. "Are you lost, child?" she asks, her voice calm and even. You are so overcome you can barely speak. You just nod, clutching the cloth pouch with your few remaining coins. I was told there was a place here, for women, a community." "You were told correctly," she says, wiping her earthy hands on an apron. She walks towards you, her movements unhurried. This is the Beguine Age of St. Agnes. All who wish to live a pious and hard-working life are welcome to seek shelter here. She looks you over, taking in your torn hem, your exhausted face, the fear in your eyes. You look like you have come a long way. Come inside. There is soup on the hearth and a place to rest your feet. She places a gentle hand on your arm and guides you through the gate. As you step across the threshold, it feels like crossing into another realm. The noise of the city fades behind you, replaced by the soft murmur of women's voices and the gentle rhythm of their work. You have spent your whole life in spaces defined and controlled by men. Your father's house, the marketplace, the church. This is the first time you have ever stood in a place that is entirely, unapologetically, female. It is both deeply strange and feels, in a way you can't quite explain, like coming home. The woman from the garden leads you across the clean-swept courtyard to a long, low building. "This," she explains, "is the convent. Not a convent in the strict sense, but a communal house for newcomers and those without the means to rent or build their own small home within the walls." Inside, the main room is filled with the warm, savory smell of lentil soup. The fire crackles in a large hearth, and several other women are seated at a long wooden table, spinning wool into thread on drop spindles. They look up as you enter, their expressions curious but not unfriendly. Your guide introduces herself as Sister Ida. The title sister here is one of respect and community, not a formal, ecclesiastical rank. She ladles a generous portion of the thick soup into a clay bowl and hands it to you along with a chunk of dark, dense bread. You sit on a bench, your hands trembling slightly as you lift the spoon. The warmth of the soup spreads through you, a feeling of such profound relief that it almost brings tears to your eyes. As you eat, Ida sits beside you. You sit to join her, she asks gently, her voice devoid of the formal, probing tone you would expect from a nun. You swallow a spoonful of soup and nod, finding your voice. I wish to live a life of prayer and work. You repeat the words Elspeth used, the ones that have become your mantra. Ida smiles, a patient, knowing expression. That is what we all seek here, a space to serve God without. She pauses, searching for the right word, without the finality of the wall. She is talking about vows. You know that, in a traditional convent, the process of joining is a long and arduous one, culminating in a ceremony where you pledge poverty, chastity, and obedience for the rest of your life. The vows are permanent, unbreakable. To break them would be a mortal sin, a betrayal of God himself. You brace yourself for a similar line of questioning, a test of your piety and commitment. But it doesn't come. Instead, Ida explains the foundational principle of the Begin age, and it is as simple as it is revolutionary. Here, we do not take lifelong vows. She says, her voice clear and direct. You are free to stay for a year, for 10 years, or for the rest of your days. You are also free to leave tomorrow. Your commitment is not to this place, or to me, or to any rulebook written by men. Your commitment is a private one, between you and God, renewed each morning you wake and choose to remain. This is the core of the Beguine identity, and the very thing that made them so threatening to the established church. A vow was a cornerstone of medieval religious life. It was a public, legally binding, and institutionally controlled promise. The Beguines replaced this ironclad contract with something fluid and personal, intention. This shift from a public, permanent vow to a private, temporary promise was, in the eyes of many theologians, an act of supreme arrogance. It suggested a woman could manage her own spiritual life without the church's permanent scaffolding. So there is no ceremony. You ask, incredulous. There is no ceremony. She confirms, you will live a life of chastity as long as you reside here. You will obey the rules of the community, which are for the peace and good order of all, and you will work to support yourself and contribute to our shared life. That is all. If you find a husband and wish to marry, you may leave with our blessing. If your family calls you home, you may go. Your life remains your own. The freedom of it is dizzying. It's also terrifying. In your old life, your path was laid out for you, solid and unchangeable. Here, the path is one you must choose to walk every single day. It is a terrifying amount of responsibility. Historians still debate the precise legal and religious status of these unvowed women. Were they laity? Were they a new, unofficial kind of religious order? The truth is, they existed in a grey area, a legal and spiritual loophole that they masterfully exploited for over a century. They fit into no established category, which for a time gave them freedom, but would eventually make them an easy target. You look around the room at the other women. Some are young, like you, perhaps fleeing similar circumstances. Others are older, widows who found a new life year after their husbands died. You see a woman with the weathered hands of a peasant sitting next to another, whose bearing suggests a noble birth. They are a patchwork of society, united not by a vow they were forced to take, but by a choice they continue to make. One fascinatedly quirky detail of Beguine life was their trial period. A woman wishing to join would typically live in the community for a year and a day. This wasn't just to test her piety, it was a practical assessment. Could she get along with others? Was she willing to work? Did she fit into the delicate social fabric of this all-female society? It was a trial in both senses of the word. Ida can see the mixture of hope and fear in your eyes. It is a lot to take in. She says kindly, for now, just rest. Finish your soup. There will be a place for you to sleep. Tomorrow, we can speak of work. For tonight, you are simply our guest. Welcome to the Begin age. She says it with such simple sincerity that the knot of fear in your stomach finally begins to dissolve. You haven't just found a temporary shelter. You have found a place where your will, for the very first time, is considered the most sacred thing you possess. After the simple meal, Ida leads you out of the communal hall and down a narrow, tidy lane. On either side are small, individual houses, each with a neatly kept patch of garden in front. Flowers and herbs grow in abundance, adding a splash of color and a fresh, clean scent to the air. You see women sitting on their doorsteps, some reading, some sewing, some simply talking quietly with their neighbors. It's an image of profound and peaceful domesticity, yet it is utterly radical. This is not a shared dormitory, a barracks for the brides of Christ. This is our neighborhood. Ida stops before one of the smallest houses, a simple stone and timber structure. She pushes open the wooden door and gestures for you to enter. This was Sister Ayelard's home, she says softly. She passed into God's care last winter. It has been empty since. You step inside. The interior is sparse, but it is impeccably clean. There is a narrow bed with a straw-stuffed mattress, a small wooden chest for belongings, a single stool, and a tiny hearth for a personal fire. A single, unglazed window, covered by a wooden shutter, looks out onto the lane. It is smaller than the room you shared with your two sisters back home, but it is entirely, unbelievably, yours. Ida hands you a heavy iron key, a key to your own room, she says, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You take it from her. The metal is cold and solid in your palm. You stare at it, this small, notched piece of iron, and it feels more significant than a bag of gold. In your world, women do not have keys. Keys belong to men, to fathers, to husbands, to gatekeepers, to priests. Keys signify ownership, authority, and control. A woman's life is lived in rooms that are unlocked and entered by others. To be given a key to a door that you, and you alone, can lock is a gesture of trust and autonomy so profound that you feel your knees weaken. The concept of privacy, as we understand it, was a rare luxury in the 13th century. Most people live their lives in shared spaces, their every action observed by family, servants, or neighbors. For a woman, this lack of privacy was absolute. Her body was not her own. It belonged first to her father, then to her husband. Her time was not her own. Her thoughts were meant to be policed, lest they stray into sin. The Beguine age, by offering a woman a private, knockable space, was offering her a sanctuary not just for her body, but for her mind. It was a space where she could be unobstructed, where she could think her own thoughts and pray her own prayers without scrutiny. This small, architectural detail, the private dwelling, was a physical manifestation of the Beguine ideology, while some Beguines, particularly newcomers or the less affluent, lived in communal convents like the one you first entered. The ideal for many was to have their own small house within the Beguine age walls. This is something that historians who study the material culture of the period find fascinating. The layout of a Beguine age, with its individual homes, looks more like a modern village than a medieval monastery. It reflects a social structure that valued both community and individual autonomy. You run your thumb over the rough, forged iron of the key. I have no money to pay for this. You stammer, the reality of your situation crashing back in. Ida's smile is gentle. The house is a part of the community. You will pay for it with your work. You will earn your keep, and a portion of your earnings will go towards the upkeep of the Beguine age. That is our way. We all contribute. We all sustain each other. She points to the wooden chest. There are blankets inside. Get some rest. You have had a long journey. She leaves, pulling the door closed behind her. You are left standing alone in the center of the small room, the key clutched in your hand. For a long moment, you don't move. Then, tentatively, you walk to the door and slide the heavy iron bolt into place. You lean your forehead against the cool, rough wood, listening to the solid sound it made. It is the sound of security, The sound of privacy. The sound of a life that is, for the first time, truly yours to command. Later, wrapped in a coarse but clean woolen blanket, you lie on the straw mattress. For the first time in your life, no one is snoring beside you. No one can walk in without your permission. The only sound is the faint, distant ringing of a church bell from the city outside your walls and the quiet, steady beating of your own heart. It is a strange and wonderful music. The debate about whether the Beguines were proto-feminists or simply pious women seeking a practical solution to a social problem seems academic right now. What you know, with a certainty that fills your entire being, is that this small, dark, quiet room is the first place on earth where you have ever felt truly free. And you did not need a husband or an abbot to grant it to you. You were given the key by another woman. You are woken the next morning not by a clanging bell, but by the soft light filtering through the cracks in your wooden shutter and the low murmur of activity outside your door. When you emerge, the begin age is already alive with the gentle hum of industry. The air smells of damp earth from the gardens, lye soap from the laundry, and the unmistakable, slightly sweet scent of wool being processed. This is not the idleness of a cloister, where prayer is the primary form of labor. This is a factory without walls, powered entirely by female hands. I defines you and takes you to a large workshop, its wide open doors revealing a dozen looms of varying sizes. This, she explains, is the heart of the Begin Age's economy. The women of this community are renowned throughout the city for the quality of their woolen linen cloth. They buy raw fleece from farmers, and then perform every step of the complex production process themselves, washing and carding the wool, spinning it into thread, dyeing it in vibrant colors, and weaving it into fine textiles. Your first job is at the bottom of the ladder. You are given the task of washing raw wool in a large stone basin filled with cold water and lye. It is back-breaking, smelly work. The fleece is greasy with lanolin and filled with dirt and burrs. Your hands are soon raw from the harsh soap and the coarse fibers. But as you work alongside other women, you begin to understand the genius of this place. The economic independence of the Beguines was their superpower and their greatest threat. In an era where a woman's property legally belonged to her husband or father, the Beguines created a corporate, all-female economy. They were not just workers. They were entrepreneurs. They formed guilds, controlled supply chains, and set prices for their goods. This financial autonomy is a key point that many historical accounts emphasize. It's what allowed them to build their own chapels, fund their infirmaries, and support their poorer members without having to ask a single man for permission or money. You watch as a cart arrives at the gate, laden with bolts of finished cloth. A woman with a sharp eye and a confident air, introduced to you as the mistress of the weavers, negotiates fiercely but fairly with a merchant from the city. She is not deferential. She knows the value of her community's labor, and she will not be cheated. The merchant, a man used to dealing with other men, seems slightly off balance, but he is respectful. He needs their product. The quality is too good to get elsewhere. Later in the day, Ida shows you the other industries thriving within the walls. There is a small brewery, producing a well-regarded ale that is sold in the city's taverns. There is a scriptorium, where women with fine handwriting copy manuscripts, not just religious texts, but poetry and civic documents. For wealthy patrons, some women run a lace-making business, their delicate creations adorning the collars and cuffs of the nobility. Others offer their services to the city as nurses, laundresses, or bakers of fine pastries. One of the more peculiar, and frankly brilliant, side hustles some Beguine communities engaged in was the funeral industry. They would be hired by wealthy families to professionally mourn at funerals. A practice that sounds strange to modern ears but was a serious and well-paid job. They would also prepare the bodies of the dead for burial, a task many others shied away from. It was a clever cornering of a niche market that was perpetually in demand. Who, after all, could argue with such a pious and necessary form of labor? As you return to the washing basin, You're backdating. A debate that still occupies economic historians comes to life before you. Did the Beguines represent a form of early capitalism, with their focus on profit, investment, and market competition, or were they a kind of Christian socialist commune, where resources were pooled and the community's welfare was placed above individual profit? The answer, as you see it play out, is a pragmatic and uniquely female blend of both. Each woman works to earn her own living, paying rent for her room and buying her own food. But a portion of all earnings, a kind of tax, goes into a common fund. This fund supports the elderly and the sick, maintains the communal buildings, and provides charity to the poor outside their walls. It is a system built on both individual responsibility and collective care. By the end of the day, you are exhausted in a way you never were at home. But it is a different kind of exhaustion. It is the ache of productivity, not the weariness of servitude. You have worked hard, but you have worked for yourself, for your own small room, your own bowl of soup. You are a cog in a machine. Yes, but it is a machine you are helping to build. A machine that sustains you and your sisters. As you sit down to the evening meal, listening to the quiet chatter of the women around you, you realize you haven't thought of Gerard the merchant once all day. His world, the world of dowries and contracts, already seems a lifetime away. You now belong to a different economy, an economy of skill, cooperation, and will. Weeks turn into months. The raw feeling of being a newcomer fades, replaced by the comfortable rhythms of your new life. Your hands have toughened from the lie in the wool, and you've moved from the miserable job of washing fleece to the more skilled task of carding, combing the cleaned wool between two bristled paddles to align the fibers for spinning. It is repetitive, meditative work, and it allows you to sit and listen, and what you hear, more than anything else, is women reading. In the evenings, after the final meal, the communal hall transforms. It is not a time for silent, solemn prayer as it would be in a convent. Instead, women gather in small groups. A single candle or a small oil lamp casts a warm, flickering glow over their faces, and one woman, often an older beguine with a clear, steady voice, will read aloud from a book. The first time you witness this, it feels like a secret, magical act. The book is not one of the massive, Latin-filled Bibles you've seen chained to the altar in the city's cathedral. It is smaller, bound in simple leather, and the words the woman reads are in your own familiar, everyday language, the vernacular. She is reading from a translation of the Gospels, and as she speaks, the stories you have only ever heard chanted in a language you don't understand, filtered through the mouth of a priest, come alive. The parables are no longer distant, holy pronouncements. They are stories about fishermen and farmers, about bread and wine, about loss and hope. You can understand every word. This is, you come to realize, perhaps the most radical thing happening within these walls. You are being taught to read, not all at once, and not in a formal school. You learn by listening, by watching as an older woman traces the shape of the letters with her finger, by whispering the sounds of the words until they become familiar in your own mouth. Sister Ida, seeing your interest, begins to give you lessons. She draws letters for you on a piece of slate with a charcoal stick. A is for apostle, B is for bread, C is for Christ. The literacy of the Beguines is a subject of intense historical fascination, in an age when reading was a skill largely reserved for the clergy and the male nobility. The Beguine communities became vibrant centers of female literacy. Crucially, they championed literacy in the vernacular, German, Dutch, French, rather than Latin. This was a direct challenge to the Church's intellectual monopoly. The clergy's power rested, in large part, on their exclusive ability to read and interpret the sacred texts. By translating and reading these texts for themselves, the Beguines were effectively cutting out the middleman. They were forging a direct, personal relationship with God's Word, and this was seen as an act of profound subversion. One evening, you are listening to a reading not from the Bible, but from the writings of a woman named Hetty Wijch of Outware, a Beguine mystic from earlier in the century. The reader's voice fills the quiet hall with words of passionate, almost startlingly intimate love for God. Hetty Wijch writes of her soul yearning for the divine like a lover for her beloved. This is not the stern, judgmental God of the Sunday sermons. This is a God one could have a fiery, personal, and emotional relationship with. It's intoxicating and, you suspect, deeply dangerous. You learn that this is the heart of Beguine spirituality, a focus on personal, mystical experience. They sought to feel God's presence directly, through contemplation, prayer, and an intense inner life. This mystical tradition, often called bridal mysticism for its use of the language of love and marriage, was a powerful and uniquely feminine contribution to medieval theology. Historians still puzzle over the exact nature of these mystical experiences. Were they genuine spiritual ecstasies? Were they a psychological response to a life of intense self-discipline and contemplation? Or were they a sophisticated intellectual and literary tradition, a new way of writing about the soul? The answer is likely lost to us, but the power of the words themselves is undeniable. As you slowly begin to piece together letters into words, and words into sentences, your world expands. It's as if you've been living in a house with only one small window, and someone has just thrown open all the shutters. The ability to read gives you access not just to the Word of God, but to the thoughts and feelings of other women. You are no longer just a listener. You are a participant in a great, ongoing conversation. You think of your mother and your aunt, and the countless other women in the world outside these walls. Their faith is something given to them, a set of rules and stories to be accepted without question. Your faith is becoming something you are discovering for yourself, something you can read, question, and feel in the quiet of your own heart. In teaching you the alphabet, the Beguines have given you more than just a skill. They have given you a tool to unlock your own soul, and in the 13th century, there is no tool more powerful or more perilous. Your education is not limited to letters on a page. The Beguine approach to faith is something lived and felt, woven into the very fabric of your days. It's a practical, hands-on piety that stands in stark contrast to the rigid, formulaic religion you knew before. The small chapel inside the Begin Age is simple, almost bare compared to the city's grand cathedral. There is no soaring vault, no jewel-toned stained glass. The beauty here is in its simplicity and in the fervor of the women who fill it. When you gather for prayer, there is no priest, one of the older, more respected Beguines. Often the Grand Mistress herself leads the service. She doesn't chant in Latin from a distant altar. She stands among you, and she speaks in your own language. The prayers are not just recitations, they are often spontaneous, heartfelt two praises of devotion, doubt, and gratitude. This practice of lay lead, vernacular worship was, of course, a major red flag for the church hierarchy. It bypassed their authority entirely. It implied that a group of women, with no formal theological training or holy orders, could create a sacred space and speak to God on their own terms. The Beguines are deeply devoted to the concept of the apostolic life, trying to live as the first apostles did, in poverty, simplicity, and service to others. But their interpretation of this was uniquely their own. For them, the most profound act of worship was not endless prayer in seclusion, but active work in the world. Mending the clothes of the poor was a prayer. Tending the sick was a prayer. Weaving a perfect bolt of cloth was a prayer. Your labor is not just a means to an economic end. It is a form of devotion, a way of honoring God's creation through your own skill and effort. This emphasis on an active, worldly faith led to the development of a rich and complex mystical tradition. You hear the stories of women like Mary of Beguines, one of the movement's spiritual from others. It was said that she was so overcome with divine love that she would fall into ecstatic trances, sometimes for days on end. She was said to have experienced the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, on her own body. These stories are told not as frightening tales of possession, but as inspirational accounts of a soul so close to God that the boundary between the human and the divine began to blur. Whether these ecstatic states were genuine miracles or products of extreme asceticism and psychological fervor is a question that modern historians and theologians continue to debate. Some scholars see it as a form of somatic theology, where the body itself becomes a text, a site for experiencing and expressing the divine in a world where women's voices were so often silenced. It was a way for their spiritual authority to be written on their own skin, in a language no one could ignore. You don't experience any ecstatic visions yourself. Your faith is a quieter, more grounded thing. You find it in the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly spun thread, in the shared silence of the chapel, in the kindness of Sister Ida when she helps you with a difficult passage in a book. But you see the power of this intense, personal faith in the women around you. It gives them a strength, a certainty, that is formidable. Their authority doesn't come from a bishop or a pope. It comes from within, from their immediate, personal connection to God. One of the more peculiar and controversial aspects of Beguine mysticism was their devotion to the Eucharist, the consecrated bread and wine. For many Beguines, receiving communion was an intensely personal and often ecstatic experience, a direct physical union with Christ. Some mystics wrote about tasting the sweetness of the divine on their tongues. This created a problem. The Eucharist was the one sacrament that absolutely required a male priest. The Beguines' intense focus on it created a strange dependency on the very clerical establishment they otherwise kept at arm's length. They needed priests to perform the consecration, and this often led to complex and tense relationships with the local clergy, who were both essential to their spiritual life and deeply suspicious of its passionate and orthodox nature. You learn that faith is not something you receive passively. It is something you build. You build it with your hands when you work. You build it with your mind when you read. And you build it with your heart when you pray alongside your sisters. It is a faith that is both deeply personal and intensely communal. And as you sit in the simple chapel, the sound of dozens of female voices rising and falling in a vernacular hymn, you feel a sense of belonging that the grand, cold cathedral in the city could never provide. You are a part of something alive, something growing, something that feels dangerously, wonderfully new. One morning, the usual rhythm of the Beguines is broken by the slow, solemn ringing of a single bell, not from the chapel, but from a small, sturdy building near the main gate. This, you learn, is the infirmary bell, and it signals that a new patient has been brought in from the city. Curious, you follow some of the other women. Inside the infirmary, it is a world of quiet efficiency. The air smells sharply of vinegar, used for cleaning, and a sweet, pungent aroma of herbs. Several beds line the walls, and on them lie women from the Beguine agent from the city outside. They are the sick, the injured, the dying, and tending to them are the Beguines designated as healers. You watch, mesmerized, as Sister Hilde, a stern-faced woman with surprisingly gentle hands, examines a young boy with a fever. He is the son of a baker from the city, his mother wringing her hands anxiously nearby. Hilde doesn't rely on chance or charms. She speaks to him in a low, calming voice, places a cool, damp cloth on his forehead, and prepares a tea as an e of willow bark and midaswat, a traditional remedy for fever and pain, and a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. The Beguine infirmaries were legendary. They were often the most advanced and compassionate centers of care available to the common person, especially women. While university-trained physicians were exclusively male and treated only the wealthy, the Beguine healers offered practical care to all who needed it. They combined herbal medicine, empirical observation, and a deep, faith-based commitment to charity. This work was one of the Beguines' most powerful forms of public relations. It was hard for the local bishop to condemn a group of women who were tending to his sick parishioners, often free of charge. Their charity was a shield. You are soon recruited to help. Your tasks are simple but essential. fetching clean water, washing linens, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. Under Hild's watchful eye, you begin to learn. You learn to identify different plants in the infirmary garden, comfrey to mend broken bones, chemelan to soothe a troubled mind, calendula to clean wounds. You learn how to make poultices and salves, how to change a dressing without causing pain, and, most importantly, how to sit with the dying, offering not false hope, but the quiet comfort of your presence. This knowledge, this medical lore passed down from woman to woman, is another form of forbidden text. It existed almost entirely outside the world of formal, Latin-based medicine. The male physicians of the universities often dismissed it as women's magic or old wives' tales. Yet, for the vast majority of people, it was the only medicine they ever knew. Historians of science and medicine are still trying to reconstruct this lost world of female healing, piecing it together from folk traditions, herbal manuscripts, and archaeological evidence. It is a history that was rarely written down, transmitted instead through hands-on practice and spoken word. One afternoon, you are cleaning a small wound for an elderly beguine who fell in the courtyard. Your hands are clumsy at first, but you remember Hild's instruction to be firm but gentle. As you apply a salve of yarrow and honey, both known for their antiseptic properties, the old woman looks at you with clear, intelligent eyes. "You have the touch," she says simply. "A healer must have a quiet heart and a steady hand. God gives the gift, but we must do the work." A weirdly specific detail about some Beguine infirmaries was their specialization in skin conditions. Because they were often involved in the woolen textile trades, they became adept at treating the various rashes, sores, and infections that came from working with harsh dyes and raw animal fibers. They developed special soaps and ointments, and their expertise in this niche area of dermatology was sought after, creating another strange link of dependency and respect with the outside world. Working in the infirmary changes your perspective. Inside the workshop, you create value through products, cloth, tale, manuscripts. Here, the work is different. You are not creating a product. You are tending to life itself. You are engaged in a daily struggle against pain and decay. It is messy, difficult, and often heartbreaking work. But it is also deeply profound. It is the Beguine ideal of an act of faith made manifest. You are literally performing the corporal works of mercy, feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, and caring for the sick. This reputation as healers gave the Beguines significant social and spiritual capital. It rooted them in their communities. They were not just an odd community of pious women living behind a wall. They were a vital part of the city's social safety net. This usefulness, this tangible contribution to the common good, was for a long time their best defense against their critics. In an age of plagues and rampant disease, the women who were willing to walk towards the suffering, not away from it, commanded a unique and powerful kind of respect. As you wipe the fevered brow of the baker's son, you feel it too. You are no longer just a refugee from an unwanted marriage. You are part of a community that heals, a community that serves. You are, in your own small way, becoming a woman of influence. Your world, which once consisted of a single household, has now expanded to the complex, self-contained universe of the Beguine age. Unlike any functioning city, it needs a government. You begin to see the intricate structures that hold this community of hundreds of individual, strong-willed women together. It is a republic in miniature, a masterclass in female organization, and it is presided over by a figure of immense authority, the Grand Mistress. Her name is Marguerite de Valenciennes. They most simply call her the Magistra. She is a woman in her late 50s, tall and straight-backed, with a face that seems carved from pale, unyielding stone. She's not warm and motherly like Sister Ida, nor is she a practical taskmaster like Hild the Healer. She is a stateswoman. When she walks through the courtyard, a hush falls. Her authority is absolute. Yet you learn it is not the authority of a tyrant. It is an authority that has been granted to her. the Grand Mistress of a Begin age was elected. This fact alone is astounding for the 13th century. While the rest of the world was governed by the iron laws of inheritance and patriarchal succession, the Beguines chose their leader once a year, or in some communities every 3 years. The Beguines who owned their own homes or had lived in the community for a set period would gather and cast their vote. It was a democratic process that was virtually unheard of outside of a few Italian city-states. You witnessed the subtle, year-round campaign for this position. It is not fought with speeches and banners, but with reputation. A woman known for her piety, her sharp business sense, her fairness in resolving disputes, and her ability to negotiate with the male authorities of the city. These are the qualities that earn respect and, eventually, votes. The Grand Mistress was a CEO, a spiritual guide, a Chief Justice, and a foreign diplomat who rolled into one. She oversaw the Begin Age's finances, approved new building projects, mediated conflicts between residents, and, most critically, acted as the community's face and advocate to the outside world. One afternoon, you see this in action. A city official, a portly man in a velvet chundro, arrives at the gate with 2 guards. He has come to complain about the Begin Age's diversion of water from a small stream that also feeds a nearby tannery. The tanner, a powerful member of the city council, is furious. The official is belligerent and dismissive, clearly expecting to intimidate a group of defenseless women. The magistra meets him at the gate. She does not shout or plead. She listens patiently, her hands folded in the sleeves of her simple grey robe. When he is finished with his blustering tirade, she speaks in a voice that is low, and utterly immovable. She produces a charter, a roll of parchment bearing the seal of the local duke, granted 50 years prior, which explicitly gives the Begin Age rights to that stream. She then calmly explains that the tanner has been illegally dumping his toxic waste upstream, poisoning the water not just for the Begin Age, but for the entire neighborhood. She suggests, with a politeness that is sharper than any insult, that perhaps the city council should be investigating the tanner's violations, not her own community's legal rights. The official is left sputtering, his argument completely dismantled. He leaves with a grudging nod of respect, his guards looking far less imposing than they did on arrival. It is a stunning display of power, not the power of the sword, but the power of knowledge, lull, and unshakable self-possession. It's a classic example of what historians call navigating the patriarchy. The Beguines couldn't overthrow the male power structure, so they learned to master its own rules, its laws, its contracts, its social codes, and use them to their own advantage. A strange and little-known aspect of Beguine governance was the existence of a kind of internal judicial system. If the Beguines had a dispute, a business deal gone wrong, an accusation of theft, they would bring their case before the Grand Mistress and a council of elder juries. Witnesses would be heard, evidence presented. The verdict was binding. This system kept their affairs private and prevented them from having to air their dirty laundry in the male-dominated city courts. Academics still debate how formal these courts were. Were they just informal mediations, or did they have written rules and precedents, a common law of their own? The records are sparse, but the evidence suggests a surprisingly sophisticated system of self-governance. You realize that the strength of the Begin Age is not just in its economic independence or its spiritual fervor. It is in its organization. It is a body politic, a carefully constructed society with its own laws, its own leader, and its own means of survival. The women here are not just living together, they are governing together. They are proving, day by day, that a community of women does not need male oversight to be orderly, prosperous, and just. It is a quiet, lived argument for female competence in a world that constantly denies it, and it is this very success, this shining example of a world that works without them, that is beginning to attract the wrong kind of attention. The years pass. You are no longer the frightened newcomer sleeping in an empty cottage. You have found your place. You've become a skilled weaver, your hands now moving with an instinctual grace across the threads of the loom. You have your own small house, the one Ida first gave you, and you have made it your own. A pot of thyme grows on your windowsill, and a small, hand-copied book of Psalms rests on a shelf beside your bed. The Beguine age is not just a sanctuary anymore. It is your home, your world, your life's work, and it is a world at the peak of its prosperity. Your community has grown. More houses have been built, crowding the lanes with new life. The workshops are expanding, taking on bigger and more lucrative contracts. The cloth woven within these walls is now so sought after that merchants from as far away as Italy come to purchase it. The profits from this trade have made the Beguine age wealthy, not in a flashy, ostentatious way, but with a deep, solid foundation of collective security. This wealth is visible everywhere you look. The central infirmary has a new wing, built of cut stone instead of timber. The chapel boasts a new bell, its clear, bright tone a symbol of the community's standing. The communal fund is so robust that the Beguine age has begun to act as a bank, lending money, at a fair, non-usurious rate, of course, to local artisans and even to the cash-strapped city council itself. You are no longer just a group of pious women. You are a major economic and social power in the region. You see the influence in the way people in the city treat you. When you walk to the market to buy vegetables, the vendors greet you with a respect that borders on deference. They call you good sister or my lady. They know that the Beguines are reliable customers who pay their debts and whose charity supports the city's poorest residents. You have earned your place through competence and compassion. This period, roughly the mid to late 13th century, is often considered the golden age of the Beguines. They had achieved a perfect, delicate balance. They were pious enough to earn the protection and admiration of many in the church, yet independent enough to live on their own terms. They were economically powerful enough to be respected by the secular authorities, yet charitable enough to be loved by the common people. It was a testament to what a society of women, free from the direct control of men, could build. One of the oddest manifestations of their success was the Beguine wine in some of the larger, wealthier Beguine ages, particularly in the Rhineland. The communities owned their own vineyards. They produced a high-quality wine that became a luxury good, prized by bishops and barons alike. The image of these supposedly humble, pious women acting as savvy wine merchants, controlling a valuable commodity from grape to goblet, is a delightful and telling contradiction. It shows just how far their economic enterprises could reach. But, as you sit in the courtyard on a warm summer evening, listening to the contented hum of your community, a small, unsettling feeling begins to creep in. You have become successful, and success breeds envy. Your walls, once a shield, are beginning to look like the ramparts of a fortress. Your quiet, self-sufficient life, once an object of curiosity, is starting to be seen as a silent, implicit rebuke to the world outside. The historical debate here is a poignant one. Was the Beguines' downfall inevitable, a direct result of their success? Or was it caused by a specific series of historical events and changing religious attitudes? Many scholars argue that by becoming so powerful and self-contained, they inadvertently created the conditions for their own persecution. They were an anomaly the patriarchal system could tolerate as long as they were small and marginal. But as a wealthy, influential, and intellectually vibrant alternative to both marriage and the convent, they had become too big to ignore. They were no longer just a third door. They were a rival establishment. You see the first signs of this in small, subtle ways. A sermon at the cathedral on the sin of pride, with a pointed reference to lay people who set themselves up as judges of Scripture. A group of young men from the university jeering at a group of Beguines in the street, calling them apostles in aprons. A merchant who was out-negotiated by the magistra complaining loudly in a tavern that the women were getting above their station. The walls of the Beguine age are high, and the gate is strong, But you are beginning to realize that some dangers cannot be kept out by stone and timber. The world outside is watching you, and the respect you have worked so hard to earn is beginning to curdle into something else, something much more dangerous. The golden age feels bright and warm, but you can see, in the distance, the first faint wisps of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The higher you build your walls, the longer and darker the shadow they cast. The first stone is not thrown in anger. It is offered with a smile. He is a young priest, Father Thomas, newly assigned to the parish that borders the Beguine age. He is intelligent, articulate, and at first, he seems like an ally. He expresses profound admiration for your community's piety and charitable works. He asks to attend your vernacular readings, praising your devotion while gently suggesting that a learned hand might help guide you through the more complex theological passages. He begins to visit regularly. At first, his presence is a welcome novelty. He brings news from the wider world of the Church, of debates happening in Paris and Rome. He engages the magistra in lengthy discussions about theology, treating her as an intellectual peer, something you have never seen a priest do before. But slowly, subtly, the nature of his visits begins to change. His questions become more pointed, more probing. He sits in on your readings, and his comments are no longer helpful clarifications but corrections. He starts questioning your interpretations. That is an interesting folk reading of the passage, he might say, but St. Augustine teaches us to understand it in a more allegorical sense. He subtly reasserts the clergy's role as the sole legitimate interpreters of Scripture. He is not attacking your faith. He is trying to colonize it. One evening, he asks to see some of the books written by Beguine mystics, the passionate, personal accounts of divine love that are the heart of your spiritual tradition. He reads a passage from Mettich Love Magdeburg, a Beguine who wrote of her soul dancing with God. When he looks up, his smile is gone. "This is dangerous language," he says, his voice losing its warmth. It borders on the presumptuous. To speak with such familiarity of the divine mystery, it lacks the proper humility. A woman's piety should be simple, obedient. This moment marks a crucial turning point. The very things that define Beguine spirituality, the personal mystical experience, the direct access to Scripture, the use of the vernacular, are being restrained. What was once seen as profound piety is now being labeled as potential heresy. The intellectual and spiritual freedom you have cherished is being re-categorized as a lack of discipline, a dangerous straying from the proper path. Father Thomas represents a new, rising tide within the Church. The 13th and 14th centuries saw a powerful movement towards scholasticism, the standardization of doctrine, led by figures like Thomas Aquinas. The goal was to create a single, unified, and rationally explained system of theology. There was a growing obsession with definitions, categories, and orthodoxy. The Beguines, with their fluid, personal, and emotional faith, simply did not fit into this neat new system. They were a theological loose end, and the Church was becoming increasingly intolerant of loose ends. The historical debate surrounding this shift is complex. Was the Church's growing suspicion a genuine theological concern about the potential for heresy among an uneducated laity? Or was it a more cynical power play, an attempt to bring a popular and influential lay movement back under direct clerical control? The answer is probably a mixture of both. The clerics likely believed they were saving the Beguines' souls from error, while simultaneously reasserting their own authority and control over religious life. A particularly odd source of friction was the Beguine practice of extreme fasting. Some Beguine mystics would consume nothing but the Eucharist for extended periods. To them, this was an act of supreme devotion. To the increasingly skeptical clergy, it looked suspiciously like a rejection of God's creation and a form of spiritual pride. It was an unsanctioned miracle, and the Church was becoming the sole licensed distributor of miracles. Any freelance mysticism was viewed with deep suspicion. Father Thomas's reports to the bishop are, "You suspect filled with carefully worded concerns. He would never accuse you outright of heresy. The word he would use is far more insidious. Suspect. He would report that your community is pious. Yes, but they interpret scripture for themselves. They are charitable, but they follow their own rule, not one approved by the church. Their spiritual writings are moving, but they are unorthodox. He is building a case, not with accusations, but with qualifications. He is poisoning the well with holy water. The atmosphere in the Begin age begins to change. The readings continue, but a shadow of self-consciousness now hangs over them. When someone reads a particularly passionate passage from a mystic, women exchange nervous glances. Is this piety? Or is it pride? Is this a holy insight? Or a dangerous error? The priest's prying questions have planted a seed of doubt, not in your faith in God, but in your faith in yourselves. You have been taught to question, but now you are being questioned. And you realize with a chilling certainty that you do not have the institutional power to provide the correct answers. The subtle poison seeping from the clergy begins to find fertile ground outside your walls. The attitude of the townspeople, once a comfortable mix of respect and mild curiosity, starts to shift. The change is not dramatic. It's a slow, creeping rot. A series of small incidents that, taken together, signal a dangerous change in the social climate. It begins in the marketplace, where vendors once greeted you with a friendly good sister. Some now look away, or serve you with a sullen silence. A beguine who is a skilled baker finds her sales dwindling. A rumor has started that her bread is proud, baked with an unholy self-satisfaction. It is, of course, a ridiculous accusation, but it sticks. Pride is becoming the key charge against you. Your success, your competence, your very ability to thrive without male governance is being reinterpreted as a form of spiritual arrogance. You experience it yourself one afternoon. You are haggling with a warm merchant over the price of a new fleece delivery. You are firm but fair, using the knowledge you've gained over the years to insist on a just price. A few months ago, he would have respected your shrewdness. Today, he throws his hands up in theatrical frustration, bargaining like a man. He spits, loud enough for others to hear. These beguines think they are the new masters of the city, too proud to accept an honest offer from an honest man. The small crowd that has gathered murmurs in agreement. You feel a flush of shame and anger, but you say nothing. To argue would only confirm his accusation of arrogance. You pay his inflated price and leave, your cheeks burning. The whispers in the taverns and workshops are all the same. The beguines are getting too rich. They are taking work away from honest family men. Their piety is a performance, a way of lording their supposed holiness over everyone else. Your community's virtues are being systematically twisted into vices. Your independence is now seen as defiance. Your piety is pride. Your economic success is greed. This shift is a classic case of what sociologists call race sentiment. The envy and resentment of the less successful towards the successful. The beguines had, for a time, managed to operate outside the normal social hierarchy. But as their influence grew, they became a target for the anxieties of the urban middle class. The male artisans and merchants who saw the beguines' well-organized workshops not as a source of high-quality goods, but as direct economic competition, became your most vocal critics. Their complaints found a sympathetic ear with the clergy, who were already looking for reasons to bring you to heel. One of the strangest and most specific accusations leveled against the beguines was that of idleness, which is deeply ironic given how industrious they were. Critics would see beguines engaged in silent contemplation or reading, and label it as laziness. In a world where female labor was supposed to be purely domestic and in service to a family, the idea of a woman sitting alone with a book for her own spiritual or intellectual enrichment was seen as a kind of theft. She was stealing time that should have been dedicated to more productive, meeting male-defined tasks. This accusation is something historians of gender find particularly telling. as it reveals a deep-seated anxiety about the control of women's time. The Magdistra is keenly aware of this changing tide. She calls a meeting in the communal hall. The mood is somber. She warns you all to be careful, to be humble in your dealings with the townspeople, to give no one any cause for complaint. We must be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves, she says, her voice heavy. Our success has made us a target. Do not boast of our prosperity. Do not argue in the marketplace. We must be quieter, smaller, less visible. It feels like a betrayal of everything you have built. You have worked for decades to create a community that is strong, visible, unrespected. Now you are being told to hide your strength, to retreat back into the shadows. You can feel the walls of the Begin age, which once felt like the protective arms of a mother, slowly starting to feel like the walls of a fortress under siege. That evening, as you walk back to your small house, someone throws a rotten vegetable from a darkened alley. It clatters against the stone wall beside you. It's a small act of petty vandalism, but it feels like a physical blow. The unspoken social contract that has protected you for so long is breaking down. The respect that was your shield has been tarnished, and the poison of envy is seeping under the gate. You are no longer just the pious sisters of the Begin age. You are becoming the other, and the other is never safe. The pressure from the townspeople and local clergy is a slow, grinding erosion of your security. But a new, more formidable threat soon emerges, and it comes from within the church itself. They arrive in the city not with the subtle probing of Father Thomas, but with the focused, disciplined energy of a new kind of spiritual army. They are the mendicant friars, particularly the Dominicans and the Franciscans. On the surface, they seem like natural allies. Like you, they champion a life of apostolic poverty and service. They live and work among the urban poor, rejecting the landed wealth of the old monastic orders. They are the dynamic, cutting edge of the church, and they are wildly popular with the common people. But you soon learn that their vision of a renewed church has no room for a freelance spiritual movement like yours. The Dominicans, especially, become your direct rivals. Their official title is the Order of Preachers, and they see themselves as the church's new intellectual gatekeepers and defenders of orthodoxy. They are university-trained, expert theologians and debaters, and they are on a mission to standardize belief and stamp out anything that smells of error. Your quiet, mystical, vernacular faith is, to them, a dangerously untutored and emotionally indulgent form of religion. You see their leader, a friar named Brother Conrad, preaching in the main square. He is a charismatic and powerful speaker. He doesn't shout and rave. He's paralyzed in his calm, unassailable logic. His ability to build an intellectual fortress of doctrine from which he can pass judgment on all others. He preaches about the absolute necessity of obedience to the church's authority, the dangers of private interpretation of scripture, and the arrogance of the unlearned who believe they can find God without a priest's guidance. He never mentions the Begin age by name, but every word is a perfectly aimed arrow shot over your walls. The rivalry was not just theological, it was economic and social. The friars and the Beguines were competing for the same resources, the patronage of the wealthy, the loyalty of the urban masses, and the role of spiritual guide for the community. In the spiritual marketplace of the 13th century city, you were competing brands, and the friars had a much more powerful corporation backing them. Historians often frame the conflict in these terms, a struggle for market share in the business of salvation. It's a cynical view, perhaps, but it captures the practical reality of the situation. The friars begin to actively work against you. They establish third orders for lay women, offering a way for them to live a pious life under the direct supervision and control of the mendicant orders. It is a brilliant and insidious strategy. They have co-opted your model but placed it firmly under male, clerical authority. They fuels the younger, more timid women from your Begin age, frightened by the changing atmosphere in the town, actually leave to join this new, safer, sanctioned alternative. Each departure feels like a small defeat, One of the strangest and most petty areas of conflict was over the practice of begging. The Franciscans, in particular, were mendicants, meaning they lived by begging for alms. The Beguines, on the other hand, prided themselves on their work ethic and self-sufficiency, though they also collected alms for their charitable activities. This led to a direct competition for the charitable donations of the townspeople. Mendicant preachers would sometimes rail against the sturdy beggars of the Beguines, who they claimed were able to work but chose to beg, taking bread from the mouths of the truly needy friars. It was a bizarre turf war over who had the right to be seen as the most piously pure. The Dominicans' influence grows. They become the favored confessors of the city's elite. They are given control of the university's theology department. And, most ominously, they are increasingly entrusted by the Pope with a new and terrible responsibility, the formal inquisition into heresy. Their founder, Saint Dominic, is posthumously hailed as the hammer of heretics. They are no longer just your rivals. They are becoming your potential judges. You feel the net tightening. The local priests question your orthodoxy. The local merchants resent your economic success. And now, a powerful, internationally organized order of intellectual zealots is actively working to absorb or eliminate you. The safe, autonomous space you have built is looking increasingly fragile. Your third way, your beautiful loophole, is being systematically closed off. The world is being forced back into a binary choice. And you're on the wrong side of the dividing line. The rivals in their stark black and white robes are not just preaching a different path to God, they are methodically erasing yours. The cumulative effect of the rumors, the resentment, and the rivalry comes to a head one bright, cold autumn afternoon. A traveling preacher, a Franciscan friar known for his fiery hell and damnation style of oratory, has been invited by the city council to deliver a series of sermons in the main square. His arrival has been the talk of the town for weeks. Curiosity, mixed with a sense of foreboding, leads you and a few other Beguines to the edge of the square. You stand at the back of the enormous crowd, your simple grey robes making you feel both conspicuous and invisible. The friar, a thin, weary man with eyes that seem to burn with a cold fire, stands on a wooden platform. His voice, honed by years of open-air preaching, is a powerful instrument, rising from a conspiratorial whisper to a thunderous roar that echoes off the surrounding buildings. His sermon is on the parable of the talents, the story of the servants entrusted with their master's money. It starts as a standard condemnation of sloth and a call to use God's gifts wisely, but then he pivots, his voice drops, becoming sharp and accusatory. But what of those who are so proud of their own talents that they believe they no longer need the master? He cries, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. What of those who take the master's coin, the Holy Scripture, and instead of investing it with the Bank of Holy Mother Church, they trade it amongst themselves in their own debased currency? In the vulgar tongue of the street, a murmur runs through the crowd. He is not being subtle. Everyone knows who he is talking about. They set themselves up as teachers when they have not been taught. They claim to hear the voice of the Spirit, but they refuse the counsel of the priests ordained by that same Spirit. They weave in, they trade and they grow fat on the profits of this world, and they call it piety. I call it pride, the deadliest of sins. His words are like hammer blows. He is taking every aspect of your life, your vernacular literacy, your lay-lead spirituality, your economic independence, and holding it up as proof of your damnation. He is articulating, in the most public and powerful way, all the vague suspicions and resentments that have been festering in the city for months. A man in the crowd, a weaver whose guild has been losing business to your workshop, shouts, "Preacher, brother," others take up the cry. The mood in the square is turning ugly. The crowd's energy shifting from pious attention to a kind of righteous mob anger. You feel a prickle of genuine fear. This scene, or one's very much like it, played out across Europe. The traveling preachers of the mendicant orders were the mass media of their day. shaping public opinion with a power that is hard to overstate. Their sermons were a potent mix of theological instruction, social commentary, and pure entertainment, and the Beguines became a frequent and popular target. Historians who study these sermons note a common theme: the portrayal of the Beguine as a figure of dangerous female presumption. She was the pseudo-woman, the woman who usurped the roles of men, preaching, teaching, controlling property, and in doing so, threatened the very foundations of the God-given social order. One particularly bizarre and recurring accusation found in these sermons was that Beguines were secretly Maniachean heretics. Manichaeism was an ancient Persian religion that saw the world as a struggle between a good, spiritual world and an evil, material one. The charge was absurd. There is no evidence any Beguines held these beliefs. But it was a convenient and terrifying label. By linking the Beguines to a well-known and universally condemned ancient heresy, preachers could bypass the need for actual evidence and simply activate a pre-existing prejudice in the minds of their listeners. It was a classic propaganda technique. The friar on the platform is reaching his climax. The master is returning. He thunders, and he will ask for an accounting. Woe to the servant who says, "Master, I did not trust your bank, so I created my own." Woe to the woman who says, "Lord, I did not listen to your priests, for I found a sweeter voice in my own heart." Their house, built on the sand of their own pride, will be washed away. He makes the sign of the cross, and the sermon is over, but the crowd does not disperse. They remain, talking in agitated groups, their faces turned towards the street that leads to your begin age. The sermon has sharpened their anger, given it a divine sanction. It is no longer just petty jealousy, it is a holy crusade. You and your sister slip away from the edge of the square, your heads bowed, your hearts pounding. You do not run, but your walk is quick and purposeful. You can feel the eyes of the crowd on your backs, and the stares are no longer curious or even resentful. They are hostile. The sermon has done its work. It has drawn a line in the sand, and you are on the wrong side. When you reach the safety of the gate and hear the heavy wooden bar slide into place, the sound is not comforting. It sounds like the door of a trap being sprung. The sermon in the square is not just a local event. It is a symptom of a much larger, more coordinated campaign. The intellectual and theological arguments being formulated in the universities of Paris and Cologne are filtering down, weaponized into sermons for the masses. The tide of official opinion is turning against all forms of freelance, lay piety. And then, the abstract threat becomes terrifyingly real. The news arrives, carried by traveling merchants and pilgrims, a story whispered in hushed, fearful tones. It is the news of the smoke from Paris. The story is about a woman named Marguerite Porty. You have heard of her. She is a French Beguine, a writer, a mystic of great renown. Her book, The Mirror of Simple Souls, is famous. Copies of it, painstakingly made by hand, are secretly circulated and treasured within Beguine communities, including your own. The Magister has a copy, which she keeps hidden. You have heard passages read aloud. The book is a complex, beautiful, and deeply challenging work of mystical theology. It describes the journey of the soul to a state of union with God so complete that it is annihilated, freed from the constraints of will, reason, and even the Church's own rules and sacraments. The book argues that a soul that has achieved this perfect union with the far near, as she calls God, is above the conventional virtues. It has no need for priests or for the Church, for it lives in a state of perpetual grace. It is a powerful, intoxicating idea, the ultimate expression of the Beguine search for a direct, unmediated relationship with the divine. It is also, from the perspective of the Church hierarchy, the most dangerous idea in the world. The news that trickles into your begin age is fragmented, but the pieces form a horrifying picture. Marguerite Porty had been warned. Her book had been condemned by the local bishop years ago and publicly burned. She was ordered to stop circulating her ideas. She refused. She believed her work was divinely inspired. and she would not bow to the authority of men she considered less spiritually enlightened than herself. She continued to write and teach. So she was arrested. She was brought before the Dominican Inquisitor of Paris, a man named William of Paris, who was also the personal confessor to the King of France, Philip the Fair. She was imprisoned for over a year and a half. She refused to speak, refused to take any oath, refused to answer the Inquisitor's questions. Her silence was taken as an admission of guilt. A commission of 21 of the finest theologians in Paris was convened to examine her book. They declared it, and her, heretical on multiple counts. And so, on the 1st of June in the year 1310, Marguerite Porty was taken to the place de Grève in Paris. She was handed over to the secular authorities, as was the custom, and there, she was burned at the stake. The story is told that she faced her death with such calm and serene courage that the crowd, which had gathered to jeer a heretic, was moved to tears by her piety. But this detail offers no comfort. The fact remains, the authorities had taken a Beguine, one of the most respected intellectual lights of your movement, and executed her in the most brutal way imaginable. They burned her body to ash and scattered her ideas to the wind. The burning of Marguerite Porty is a watershed moment. It sends a shockwave of terror through every Beguine community in Europe. The academic debate on this is stark. Was Porty executed for her specific, radical theological ideas, or was she made an example of? Her death a political act designed to crush the Beguine movement as a whole. Most historians agree it was a potent combination of both. Her book provided the perfect theological justification, but her status as a prominent, defiant, and influential female lay leader made her an irresistible target. She was the nail that stuck up, and she was hammered down with terrifying force. A small, chilling detail of her case was that the inquisitors used her own gender against her. The official record of her condemnation refers to her as a pseudo-mulia, a fake woman, and dismisses her writings as filled with errors and heresies due to her unlearned female nature. It was a classic catch-22. Her intelligence and theological sophistication were proof of her unnatural, heretical pride. The magistrat calls another meeting. This time, the mood is not one of grim resolve, but of palpable fear. She brings out her hidden copy of the Mirror of Simple Souls. With trembling hands, she fades its pages, one by one, into the hearth fire. You watch as the beautiful, careful script curls, blackens, and turns to ash. The words of divine love, the daring exploration of the soul, disappear into smoke. It feels like a part of your own spirit is being burned away. Any other books like this are to be destroyed. The Magistra says, her voice a strained whisper. We can no longer afford the luxury of such thoughts. We must be simple now. Our piety must be silent. What happened to our sister in Paris is a warning. The smoke from her pyre is a message to us all. The message is clear. The rules have changed. The space for intellectual exploration and mystical speculation has vanished. From now on, survival will require a radical form of conformity. The fire in Paris is cast along, cold shadow, and it has reached your door. The execution of Marguerite Porty is the lightning flash that illuminates the storm. The thunder follows soon after. A year later, in 1311, the most powerful men in Christendom gather in the city of Vignes, in southeastern France. It is a grand church council, convened by Pope Clement V, a Frenchman heavily under the influence of the French king, Philip the Fair, the same king who had allowed Porty to be burned on his soil. The official agenda of the Council of Vignes covers many things. The final suppression of the Knights Templar, plans for a new crusade, reforms of the clergy, but deep within the council's proceedings, a decision is made that will seal the fate of your community. News of the papal decree trickles out slowly, but when it reaches you, its meaning is brutally clear. The document is a canon, a piece of church law, titled Cum de Quibusdam Mulieribus, concerning certain women. It addresses the Beguines directly. It acknowledges that there are some pious women who live chastely and do good works. But then it pivots, unleashing the full weight of papal authority against your way of life. The Pope, echoing the arguments of the friars and the theologians, declares that there exists a certain type of beguine who is plagued by a type of madness and disputes and preaches about the highest Trinity and the divine essence, and who holds erroneous opinions about the articles of faith and the sacraments. The decree does not distinguish between these supposedly heretical beguines and the rest. Instead, it makes a sweeping, devastating condemnation of the beguine status itself. It attacks the very foundation of your existence, the lack of a permanent vow in the absence of an approved rule. It states, with the force of infallible law, that the way of life of women who obey no one are not enclosed, and wander about is perpetually forbidden and is to be perpetually prohibited. The language is unambiguous. Your way of life is now illegal in the eyes of the Church. The third door has been officially nailed shut and plastered over with a papal seal. The Magister reads a smuggled copy of the decree aloud in the communal hall. A wave of shock and disbelief ripples through the room. How can this be? How can your life of prayer, work, and charity be condemned by the Vicar of Christ himself? You have always considered yourselves loyal daughters of the Church. Now, you have been declared outlaws. The historical context of this decree is crucial. The papacy, having recently moved from Rome to Avignon, was in a period of weakness and turmoil. Pope Clement V was highly dependent on the powerful and ruthless King Philip IV of France. Philip had already destroyed the Templars to seize their wealth, and he and his ministers were deeply suspicious of any group that operated with a degree of autonomy within their kingdom. Historians debate the exact motive for the condemnation. Was it a genuine, if misguided, attempt to protect doctrinal purity? Was it a power grab by the mendicant orders to eliminate their spiritual rivals? Or was it part of a broader trend of state building and centralization, an effort by both secular and religious authorities to eliminate any and all independent social bodies? The consensus is that it was a toxic brew of all three. A particularly cruel and bizarre detail within the papal bull was the exception it carved out for pious women who faithfully served the Lord, living humbly and converted in their dwellings. This vague clause created a loophole. What did faithfully serve mean? Who decided who was humble? This intentional ambiguity was a tool of control. It gave local bishops the discretionary power to decide which begin ages would be tolerated and which would be suppressed. It effectively turned every grand mistress into a supplicant, forced to prove her community's humility and obedience to the local male authorities, stripping her of the very independence that had defined her role. The decree also explicitly gives the newly empowered inquisitors the authority to proceed against them, as they would against heretics. The threat is no longer abstract. It is now codified in the highest law of the Church. Any inquisitor, any zealous bishop, can now walk through your gates armed with a papal mandate to dismantle your life. A profound sense of betrayal settles over the Beguine age. You have built this world with your own hands, following what you believe to be a true and holy path. You have cared for the sick, clothed the poor, and enriched the life of the city, and your reward is to be condemned by a distant pope, lumped in with mad women and heretics. The fear in the room is thick enough to choke on. What does this mean for you? Will you be forced to disband? Will your property be confiscated? Will you be arrested, interrogated, forced to confess to heresies you do not believe in? You look at the faces of your sisters. Bida, Hild, the old woman in the infirmary, the young girl at the loom beside you. You are a family, a society, a nation of women, and a piece of parchment from a palace in France has just declared your nation illegal. The papal decree is not just a threat, it is a license. It is a hunting license, and it isn't long before the hunter arrives. His name is Brother Johann, a Dominican inquisitor dispatched from the regional episcopal court. He does not arrive with a band of armed soldiers or a furious mob. The Inquisition, in its early stages, is a far more insidious and bureaucratic beast. He arrives with a single clerk, 2 books under his arm, a Bible and a ledger. His arrival is quiet, almost anticlimactic. He doesn't storm the gates. He presents himself to the magistra, his papers in perfect order, his tone polite, almost scholarly. He is not here to burn heretics, he explains calmly. He is here to conduct a visitation, an inquiry into the spiritual health of the community, as mandated by the Holy Father's decree. His politeness is more terrifying than any threat. It is the sterile, impersonal calm of a surgeon before an amputation. The shadow of the Inquisitor falls over every aspect of your life. He sets up a small office in a room near the gate, transforming it into a courtroom. He begins by examining the Begin Age's financial records. His clerks quill scratching away, documenting every transaction, every contract, every source of income. Your economic independence, once a source of pride, is now evidence to be scrutinized. Then he begins the interviews. One by one, each woman in the Begin Age is summoned to his office. You wait for your turn for days, a knot of ice in your stomach. When you are finally called, you enter a room that has been stripped of all its familiar warmth. Brother Johann sits behind a plain wooden table. His face is impassive, his eyes intelligent and searching. He does not ask you about your faith in God. He asks about your opinions. Have you ever read from a book not approved by the bishop? Have you ever attended a prayer service not led by an ordained priest? Have you ever held the belief that a soul in a state of grace is above the law of the church? Have you ever believed that you could understand the meaning of Scripture without the guidance of the clergy? The questions are trapped. They are designed to make you incriminate yourself, to twist your lived piety into a formal confession of heresy. Your entire life, the very principles of the Begin Age, are being presented to you as a list of crimes. You answer with the simple, cautious truths that the Magistra has instructed you all to use. I am a simple woman. I believe all that the Holy Mother Church teaches. I leave matters of theology to those more learned than I. It is a humiliating, soul-crushing litany of self-abnegation. You must erase yourself, deny your own intelligence and spiritual experience, just to survive. The process of the medieval Inquisition is a subject of intense historical study and debate. It was not the chaotic witch hunt of later centuries. It was a methodical, legalistic process. An inquisitor's goal was not necessarily execution. It was confession, repentance, and the reassertion of church authority. They were bureaucrats of the soul. But the system was designed to produce guilt. The accused had no right to a lawyer, was not told who their accusers were, and any statement, no matter how trivial, could be used against them. One of the most chillingly effective tools of the Inquisition was the encouragement of denunciations. Brother Johann posts a notice on the gate, calling on any woman who knows of heretical beliefs or practices within the community to report them to him, for the good of her own soul. This is the deadliest poison of all. It turns your community against itself. It seeds suspicion in the space where trust once grew. Do you now look differently at the sister who was your rival in the workshop? Do you wonder what the woman who you had a disagreement with over a garden plot might say to the Inquisitor in a moment of spite? The strong fabric of your sisterhood is being deliberately unraveled, thread by thread. A truly strange and documented tactic used by some inquisitors was the analysis of mystical language. They would collect the writings of women like Hedwig or Mechthild, subject them to the cold, scholastic logic of the university. The passionate, poetic metaphors of divine love were treated as literal theological statements and often found wanting. A mystic might write, "My soul is God," as a way of expressing a feeling of ecstatic union. The Inquisitor would read this as a formal declaration of the heresy of autotheism. Your most profound spiritual expressions were being willfully, dangerously misinterpreted. You see the toll this has taken. The Magistra seems to have aged 10 years in a month. The easy companionship in the workshops has been replaced by a tense, watchful silence. The joy has been leached out of your life, replaced by a constant, low-grade fear. Brother Johann doesn't need to find a heretic. His very presence, the methodical, relentless pressure of his inquiry, is enough to break the spirit of the Begin Age. He is not just investigating your community, he is dismantling it, psychologically, from the inside out. The shadow is no longer at your gates. It is sitting in your parlor, and it is asking you to name your crimes. The Inquisitor's work is slow, patient, and suffocating. After weeks of interviews, financial audits, and the relentless pressure of his presence, Brother Johann concludes his visitation. He finds no evidence of active, organized heresy. You are not devil worshippers or maniacians. The charges are more subtle, and, in a way, more damning. His official report to the bishop will list a series of errors and tendencies dangerous to the faith. You are guilty of spiritual pride, of living without an approved rule, of reading unapproved texts, of usurping the teaching authority of the clergy. You are, in short, guilty of being Beguines. The verdict is delivered not in a dramatic courtroom scene, but in a formal meeting with the magistran, the council of elders. The bishop himself attends, his face a mask of solemn, regretful authority. He stands beside Brother Johann as the Inquisitor lays out the terms. It is not a negotiation. It is an ultimatum. A terrible choice. For the good of your souls? The bishop begins, his voice smooth and practiced, and to bring your community back into the safe and loving embrace of Holy Mother Church, certain reforms are necessary. He outlines 3 paths, 3 doors, but these are not the doors of your own choosing. These are the doors of a prison, and you are being told to pick your cell. The first option, you can formally associate yourselves with an existing, approved religious order. You can become a Third Order Dominican or Franciscan community. This would mean adopting their rule, wearing their habit, and, most importantly, submitting to the direct authority of the male leaders of that order. Your property, your workshops, your finances, everything would be placed under their control. The Grand Mistress would be replaced by a male director. You would be allowed to continue living together, but your autonomy, the very soul of the Beguine age, would be extinguished. You would become a lady's auxiliary, a pale, sanitized echo of what you once were. The second option, you can disband the community entirely. Each woman must choose to either return to her family, if they will have her, or get married. The bishop's office, he adds with a magnanimous air, would be happy to help arrange suitable matches for any unattached women. The Beguine age itself, its buildings and lands, would be forfeited and revert to the ownership of the diocese. Your world would be erased. Your collective strength shattered into 1,000 individual, dependent pieces. You would be scattered back into the patriarchal system from which you escaped. The third option, for those who feel a true and unwavering call to the contemplative life, you can enter a traditional, cloistered convent. You would have to take permanent, binding vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. You would be locked behind the wall, your life of active service in the world exchanged for one of silent, enclosed prayer. The irony is bitter. The convent, the very institution you defined yourselves against, is now being presented as your only path to legitimate piety. The bishop pauses, letting the weight of the choices settle in the silent room. There is, of course, he adds, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly, another path for those who refuse these generous offers, the path of the obstinate, and for the obstinate, the full weight of canon law will be brought to bear. He doesn't need to say the word heresy. He doesn't need to mention Marguerite Porty's fate. The threat hangs in the air, thick and suffocating as smoke. This scenario, in various forms, played out in Beguine ages across Germany, France, and the Low Countries in the decades following the Council of Vigny. Some communities were able to negotiate a kind of semi-independence, but many were faced with this exact, brutal choice. It was a masterstroke of institutional power. The Church wasn't just condemning them, it was offering them a route to salvation that was, in fact, a complete surrender of everything they stood for. Historians call this process regularization, the forcing of an irregular, anomalous group into a regular, Approved category. It's a bland, bureaucratic term for what was, in reality, the violent destruction of a unique form of female culture. A bizarre but documented part of this process in some regions was the chastity test. In order to prove their piety and be allowed to join a convent or third order, Beguines were sometimes subjected to humiliating physical examinations by a panel of midwives or senior nuns, all overseen by a male cleric. It was a final, invasive assertion of control over their bodies, a brutal reminder that even their most private selves were now subject to institutional inspection. The magistra, her face pale but her back straight, asks for time to present the choices to the community. The bishop grants it. 1 week, he says, 1 way to choose your obedience. That night, the Beguines is a place of ghosts. The workshops are silent. No one gathers in the communal hall for a reading. Women walk alone in the darkening lanes or sit on their doorsteps, staring into nothing. The choice is impossible. Do you sacrifice your freedom for a hollowed-out, supervised version of your community? Do you surrender your home and scatter to the winds? Or do you lock yourself away from the world you dedicated your life to serving? You sit in your own small room, the iron key feeling heavy and useless in your hand. This key once symbolized your freedom. Now it just unlocks a room in a building that is about to be seized. The world you built, a world of choice and will, is being taken from you, and you are being forced to sign the deed of transfer yourself. You are being asked to choose the manner of your own execution. The week is a blur of hushed, frantic conversations, of tears shed in private, and of lull, silent gatherings where the air is thick with unspoken grief. There is no easy answer. The community is fractured. Some of the older women, weary of the fight, argue for accepting the first option, becoming a third order. At least then, they say, we can stay together. Others, younger and more defiant, talk of just walking away, of taking their chances in the world. A few, the most devoutly mystical, see the convent as a dignified and holy retreat from a world that has rejected them. The choice is a crucible, testing every woman's faith, courage, and pragmatism. The magistra, with a heavy heart, can see that the community cannot agree on a single path. To force a choice would be to shatter their sisterhood completely. So, with the bishop's deadline looming, she makes the only decision she can. She will not choose for them. She will dissolve the Beguines as an independent entity, and allow each woman to find her own path. The day the officials from the diocese arrive is a grey, windswept afternoon that mirrors the mood inside the walls. They come with clerks and notaries, their faces impassive. You stand in the courtyard, the place where you first saw the vibrant, humming life of this female world, and watch as it is systematically dismantled. A priest hangs a new sign over the gate, renaming it the House of the Sisters of Penance of the Order of St. Dominic. The name itself is a judgment. You are no longer a community of pious women. You are a house of penitence. Your independence has been officially rebranded as a sin for which you must now atone. The process of confiscation is methodical and humiliating. The deeds to every house, every workshop, every garden plot are handed over to the bishop's notary. The common fund, the wealth you collectively built over generations of hard work, is transferred into the diocesan treasury. The looms in the weaving workshop are catalogued and appraised. They no longer belong to you. They belong to the church. The economic engine of your independence has ceased. Your power cut off at its source. You watch as the magistra hands over the great iron key to the main gate. It is a moment of profound symbolic surrender. The control over who enters and leaves a space is no longer in female hands. The priest who takes the key does so without ceremony, simply adding it to a large ring at his belt. This seizure of property was a key part of the suppression of the Beguines. While the official justification was always theological, the economic motive was never far from the surface. The Beguines, especially the large and successful ones, had accumulated significant wealth and prime urban real estate for a church and for secular lords who were often in dire financial straits. These independent, All female corporations were a tempting target. Historians who study the property records of this period can trace the systematic transfer of wealth from the Beguines to the male-dominated institutions that absorbed them. It was, in many ways, a massive, legally sanctioned theft. One of the strangest and most poignant details of this process was the battle over books. The Beguines libraries, filled with their precious vernacular manuscripts of scripture and mystical writings, were a primary target. Inquisitors and bishops saw them as nests of heresy. They would conduct book burnings, not just of notorious texts like Marguerite Portes, but of any religious writing not in Latin nor not explicitly approved. You see it happen. A group of priests go from house to house, collecting the small, hand-copied books that have been your spiritual lifeline. They are piled in the center of the courtyard and set ablaze. The smoke that rises smells of burning leather and parchment, the funeral pyre of your intellectual freedom. You are given a final day to pack your personal belongings. The small room that was your sanctuary, your first taste of privacy and freedom, is now just a temporary holding cell. You look at your few possessions, a wooden chest with your spare robe, the spindle you use for your own small weaving projects, the dried herbs on your windowsill. It is so little, yet it is everything. The gate, which has been open to you for so many years, now feels like an exit. As you step through it for the last time, you can't help but look back. The courtyard is almost empty. The hum of industry is gone. The laughter and conversation have been replaced by a grim silence. A place that was once a vibrant testament to female ingenuity and resilience has been hollowed out, its spirit broken. The closing of the gates is not just a physical act. It is the end of a world. The experiment is over. The world outside the gates is a harsh and unfamiliar place. For years, the Beguines has been your universe, your home, your workplace, your church, your nation. Now, that nation has been dissolved, and you are a refugee. The women you called sister for decades are forced to go their separate ways, their collective strength traumatized into individual vulnerability. You watch the sad, slow exodus. A small group of about 20 women, mostly the older and more timid ones, have chosen the first option. They remain behind the walls, but it's a hollow victory. You see them later in the week, for the first time in their new habit. A drab brown robe prescribed by the Dominicans. A priest is leading them in a Latin prayer. Their faces are blank, their movements listless. They have been allowed to stay together, but they have become prisoners in their own home. Another small group, led by a fiercely pious beguine named Lisbetty, chooses the convent. You walk with them to the gates of the Poor Clares, a strictly enclosed order on the other side of the city. The stone walls are impossibly high, the gate a slab of iron-bound oak. You embrace Lisbetty one last time. It is a cleaner choice. She whispers to you, her eyes shining with a feverish light. Better to be a true bride of Christ than a servant of priests. You watch as the heavy gate opens just enough for the women to slip through, then closes with a final, echoing thud. You will never see her again. The rest of you, the majority, are now simply homeless. You are scattered like seeds thrown onto barren ground. Some women have family in the city or in nearby villages, and they set off with their small bundles, hoping for a welcome that is far from guaranteed. You see Ida, the kind woman who first welcomed you, walking slowly towards her nephew's house. Her shoulders are slumped. She had been a respected leader in a thriving community. Now, she is a poor relation, an extra mouth to feed, dependent on the charity of others. You have no family to return to. You are truly on your own. For a few days, you bound together with 2 other former Beguines, pulling your few remaining coins to rent a dingy room in a crowded boarding house. The noise and the filth are a constant assault after the clean, orderly quiet of the Begin age. You try to find work as weavers, but the male-dominated guilds in the city have no interest in hiring independent women with your level of skill. They see you as competition. the master of the Weavers Guild. The same man who used to buy your cloth, now smirks when you ask for work. The days of the lady weavers are over, he says dismissively. Find a husband. That's a woman's proper work. This economic disenfranchisement was a deliberate and devastating consequence of the Beguines' suppression. By seizing their workshops and breaking up their production networks, the church and secular authorities effectively destroyed the foundation of their independence. It forced thousands of skilled, productive women into poverty and dependence. This is a point that social historians stress. The attack on the Beguines was not just an attack on a religious idea. It was an attack on a successful female economic model. A very strange and sad fate befell some of the most intellectually gifted Beguines, with their communities dissolved and their writings condemned. Some were forced into a kind of internal exile, living in obscurity and forbidden to write or teach. There are tantalizing hints in historical records of these silenced mystics. Women of incredible talent who were forced to spend the rest of their lives as anonymous spinsters or laundresses. Their spiritual insights locked away in their own minds. The loss of their potential contributions is immeasurable. Your small group of 3 cannot survive. The money runs out. One of your companions, a young girl named Ryan, gives up to a parish priest. She arranges a marriage to a widowed blacksmith twice her age. You watch her go, her face pale and resigned. She has chosen survival. She has walked through the first door, the one you both ran from so long ago. Now there are only 2 of you. You survive by taking on the lowest, most menial work: laundry, scrubbing floors, mending clothes for a pittance. You are no longer a skilled artisan, a respected member of a proud community. You are a day laborer, invisible and insignificant. You see other former Beguines in the streets. You recognize each other by the shared look of loss in your eyes. You exchange a quiet nod, a flicker of solidarity in a world that has cast you out. But there is nothing you can do for each other. Your collective power is gone. You are just women, alone, and a woman alone, in your world, is the most vulnerable creature there is. Years pass. The sharp edges of your grief have dulled into a constant low ache. You have survived. You found a precarious niche for yourself as a seamstress, your skilled fingers still remembering the lessons of the Beguine age looms. Even if you now work on cheap tunics instead of fine cloth, you live in a smaudic room, and your life has shrunk to the size of that room, to the point of your needle and the length of your thread. But the most insidious part of the destruction is not the loss of your home or your livelihood. It is the rewriting of your story. The authorities are not content to have just destroyed your community. They must also destroy its memory, replacing it with a new, officially sanctioned narrative. You witness this happening, this slow, methodical erasure of your history. The clergy, particularly the Dominicans, are the primary authors of this new story. In their sermons, they now use the word Beguine as a cautionary tale, a synonym for a heretic, a fool, or a woman of loose morals. They speak of the Beguine era as a plague that has been thankfully cleansed from the city. They construct a caricature. The Beguine was a proud, disobedient woman who read books she couldn't understand and thought herself the equal of priests. She was a dangerous anomaly. And her suppression was a victory for order and true faith. You hear this story repeated in the marketplace, in the taverns, by the very people who once respected you. My wife was getting some proud Beguine notions. But the friars set her straight. One man says with a laugh, "Be careful of that one." A woman whispers to another, pointing at a woman who lives alone. She has the Beguine look about her. Your identity has been turned into an insult. The word that once meant freedom, piety, and sisterhood is now a slur. This process of historical revisionism is a powerful tool of control. By changing the story, the victors make their victory seem not just necessary, but inevitable and righteous. Historians who study the persecution of heretical groups often find that the first and most crucial step is this narrative assault. Before a group can be physically destroyed, its reputation must be ruined. The victims must be reframed as villains, so that their persecution can be seen as justice. You see the physical manifestation of this error. The Beguine age itself, now a Dominican third-order house, has been altered. The individual houses, symbols of your autonomy, are being knocked through to create shared dormitories. The large workshop has been converted into a brewery for the friars' own use. The history of the place is being physically scrubbed from the stones. A particularly galling example of this rewriting was the treatment of the Beguines' charitable work in the new narrative. The Beguines' infirmaries and almsgiving were not presented as acts of genuine Christian charity. Instead, they were reinterpreted as a cynical ploy to gain popular support, a form of spiritual bribery to lure people away from the established church. Even your good deeds were posthumously poisoned. Scholars find this particular line of attack fascinating, as it demonstrates a deep anxiety about any form of social capital that exists outside of official church channels. One day, a young friar comes to your door, collecting donations for the poor. He doesn't recognize you. He sees only a pro seamstress. He launches into his practiced speech, and he tells you of the good work the church is doing, caring for the sick and the needy, a task once sadly neglected or performed with proud motives by the misguided Beguine sisters, whose souls we now pray for. You stand there in your doorway, your needle and thread in your hand, and you listen to this young, earnest man tell you a complete and utter lie about your own life. He is standing on the foundations of the world you built, a world of compassionate care and social responsibility, and he is telling you that you were the problem. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it leaves you speechless. You give him a coin. It is easier than arguing. It is safer than telling the truth. You close the door and lean against it, the full weight of your error pressing down on you. They have taken your home. They have taken your work. They have scattered your sisters. And now they are taking your past. They are stealing your story, melting it down, and recasting it as a weapon to be used against the memory of anyone like you, any woman who might dare to dream of a third door. Decades go by. Your hair is now more grey than brown, and your hands are gnarled with arthritis from a lifetime of needlework. The city has changed. The fiery zeal of the early 14th century has cooled into a more complacent, institutionalized piety. The great persecution, the Beguine hunts, are over, and in their place, something strange has happened. The Beguine ages are coming back, or rather, a version of them. You walk, one afternoon, down the familiar lane that leads to what was once your home. The sign above the gate still proclaims it a house of a third order, but the gate itself stands open again. You peer inside, and the sight is both familiar and profoundly alien. The space is still inhabited by women living in community. They are dressed in a modest, uniform habit. They tend the gardens and move about the courtyard with a quiet purpose. But the vibrant energy, the hum of independent industry, is gone. The large workshop is silent. The individual houses have been converted into a single, large dormitory. You see a priest crossing the courtyard, his presence easy and authoritative. He is not a visitor here. He is the director. This is the compromise that allowed some Beguine ages to survive. They had to surrender their autonomy to purchase their existence. These new Beguine ages, which historians often call Reguelza or enclosed Beguine ages, were a pale shadow of their predecessors. They were essentially convents without the permanent vows. The women in them were subject to strict clerical supervision. Their property was owned unmanaged by the church. They were forbidden from engaging in the kind of high-level commerce that had made their ancestors wealthy and independent, limited instead to small-scale crafts like lace-making or embroidery. They were no longer centers of female literacy and theological debate. The reading of vernacular scripture was strictly forbidden. Their spiritual lives were carefully managed, their prayers guided by the official liturgy, their confessions heard by an appointed male chaplain. The intense, personal, mystical quest for God was replaced by a safe, obedient, and thoroughly domesticated piety. The fire had been put out, leaving only the neatly swept ashes. You see a group of the women sitting on a bench. They are not reading or debating. They are mending robes for the local priests. Their heads bowed over their work in silent obedience. They are good, pious women, but they are not free. They have traded freedom for security, autonomy for acceptance. The third door has been reopened, but it now leads to a beautifully furnished antechamber of the second door, the convent. It is no longer an escape. It is a recruitment center. One of the great historical ironies, and the subject of much debate, is how this sanitized version of the Beguine life became, in some areas, a celebrated and cherished institution. By the 15th and 16th centuries, these church-controlled Beguines were often held up as models of female piety. The radical, defiant, intellectual Beguines of the 13th century had been completely forgotten, replaced in the popular imagination by this image of docile, harmless women engaged in quiet prayer and handicrafts. The victory of the patriarchy was so complete that it successfully co-opted the very name of its former rival and turned it into a symbol of ideal female submission. A bizarre, vestigial remnant of the old Beguine life that survived in some of these new communities was the right to private property. A woman entering one of these rituals at Beguines could, in some cases, retain ownership of her own possessions, unlike a nun who had to take a vow of poverty. This created a strange internal class system, with rich Beguines who could afford their own comforts living alongside poor ones supported by the institution. It was a faint echo of the old economic independence, but stripped of its collective power and purpose. As you turn to leave, an old woman tending the herb garden looks up and her eyes meet yours. For a fleeting second, you recognize her. It's a woman who was a novice in your time. A young girl named Agnes. She's old now, her face a road map of wrinkles. She recognizes you, too, a flicker of something. Memory, regret, a shared secret, passes between you, but she says nothing. She just gives a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then turns back to her herbs to speak to you. An outsider, a relic of the old ways, would be a violation of the new rules. You walk away, a profound sadness settling over you. The physical structure of your world has survived, but its soul has been surgically removed. The echo in the cloister is a testament not to resilience, but to the thoroughness of the defeat. The Beguines had not been entirely erased. Instead, they had been tamed, domesticated, and turned into a living monument to their own submission. And in some ways, that feels like a crueler fate than being destroyed completely. You live out the rest of your days in your small attic room, a quiet ghost in a city that has forgotten you. You watch the seasons turn, the fashions change, the generations of people live and die in the streets below. The world moves on, and the story of the great Beguines, of the cities of women who built their own world, fades from living memory into the dusty, unread pages of history. You are one of the last who remembers what it was truly like. You remember the sound of 100 women's voices singing a hymn in their own language. You remember the fierce intelligence in the magistra's eyes as she faced down the city official. You remember the smell of wool and dye in the workshop, the satisfying weight of a well-made tool in your hand. You remember the dizzying, terrifying freedom of holding the key to your own room for the very first time. These memories are your private scripture, a testament to a world that was deemed too dangerous to exist. The official histories, written by the friars and the clerks, will tell a different story. They will speak of heresy and pride, of unnecessary correction to a dangerous anomaly. They will not speak of the courage, the ingenuity, the sheer, brilliant competence of the women who dared to imagine a life beyond the two doors. But a legacy is not always a monument that can be seen. Sometimes it is a seed, planted deep underground, waiting for the right conditions to sprout again. The Beguine experiment, though it was brutally suppressed, was not a complete failure. The ideas it championed, female literacy, economic self-sufficiency, an individual's right to a personal spiritual life, did not die. They were simply driven into hiding. Historians trace the subtle, underground influence of the Beguines for centuries. Their mystical writings, though condemned, were secretly copied and preserved, influencing later mystics like Meister Eckhart and Thomas à Kempis. The model of a semi-monastic life for lay people, which they pioneered, was adapted and sanitized in the form of third orders and other lay confraternities. The very concept that a woman could have a rich intellectual and spiritual life, even if it was a dangerous one, had been introduced into the world. It was a bell that could not be unrung. You think of the whisper that started it all. Your Aunt Elspeth, a woman who lived her whole life in the shadows, speaking of a third power. That whisper, passed from woman to woman, was more powerful than any papal decree. It was the whisper of possibility. And you know that as long as women feel trapped, as long as their choices are limited and their spirits are constrained, that whisper will arise again. The name Beguine may be forgotten or reviled, but the impulse that created the Begin age is eternal. It is the simple, radical, and inextinguiblest human desire for a room of one's own. A strange and often overlooked aspect of the Beguines' legacy is their influence on vernacular literature. By championing the written form of their local languages for the highest possible purpose, theology and spiritual expression, they played a crucial role in the development and legend is innate of those languages. Writers like Edwidjch and Porty are now seen not just as religious figures, but as foundational poets and prose stylists in the history of Dutch and French literature. Their forbidden knowledge ended up enriching the very culture that tried to stamp it out. The debate among literary historians today isn't if they were influential, but just how deep and far-reaching that influence on secular literature truly was. From your high window, you can just see the rooftops of the old Begin age. It is quiet now, a place of silent, obedient women, but you know the truth. You know that for a brief, shining century, those walls contained a revolution. It wasn't a revolution of swords and banners, but the quiet revolution of spirit, intellect, and will. It was a testament to the simple, profound truth that when women are given the space to build, they will build a world. You close your eyes, the needle falling from your tired fingers. You are an old woman in a small room, but, in your mind, you are standing once again in the bustling courtyard of your youth. You are strong. You are capable. You are free. And you hold a key in your hand. The whisper has become a memory, but the memory feels like a promise, a quiet prophecy sent across the centuries to anyone who might be listening. And so, the story of your life, the life of the Beguine, comes to its gentle end. The threads of the past are woven into a tapestry that now hangs in the quiet hall of your imagination. The sounds of the looms have faded. The voices in the courtyard have grown soft, becoming indistinguishable from the sound of your own quiet breathing. You can feel the weight of your own body, safe and supported, as you drift from the world of the story into the even softer world that lies beyond it. There is nothing more to see, nothing more to learn. The key has turned in the lock, and the room is quiet and safe. The women of the Begin age have found their rest. Pendel, you can find yours. Allow the last echoes of their world to become the first whispers of your own dreams. Let the feeling of peace that they fought so hard to build become a soft blanket, covering you as you sink deeper and deeper into a common peaceful sleep. The final word has been whispered. If your mind is still gently stirring, you're welcome to drift into another of my stories. If not, I wish you a deep and peaceful slumber. Good night.